The moment Ethan Cole saw the headlights spiral off Highway 29 and vanish into the white abyss, he knew someone was about to die. The blizzard had turned the mountain pass into a screaming wall of ice and fury, the kind of storm that swallowed lives whole and didn't bother spitting out the bones until spring. He should have kept driving. Should have called 911 and let trained professionals handle it. Should have thought about his 7-year-old son waiting at his sister's house 30 miles down the mountain. But Sarah's face flashed through his mind. His wife, frozen beneath the lake ice 5 years ago while he'd hesitated, paralyzed by fear, and his hands were already wrenching the wheel toward the guardrail before conscious thought could override instinct. Not again. Never again. He slammed the truck into park, grabbed the emergency kit from behind the seat, and ran into the teeth of the storm that had already claimed one victim and seemed hungry for a second. Before we begin this journey through ice and redemption, I want to invite you to stay with me until the very end of this story. If it touches you, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's step into the blizzard together. The wind hit Ethan like a physical blow the moment he left the shelter of his truck. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the past hour, and the snow came at him sideways, each flake a tiny blade of ice that found every exposed inch of skin. His work boots, good enough for the construction sites where he spent his days, found uncertain purchase on the frozen asphalt as he made his way toward where the vehicle had disappeared. The guardrail had been sheared clean through, metal twisted outward like aluminum foil. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs as he approached the edge, his flashlight beam swallowed almost immediately by the swirling white chaos below. The slope descended at a vicious angle, studded with rocks and skeletal trees that appeared and disappeared in the driving snow like accusations. "Help!" The voice was faint, nearly lost beneath the wind's howl, but it was there. Female. Terrified. Alive. "I'm coming!" Ethan shouted back, though he doubted she could hear him. He looped the climbing rope from his emergency kit around the nearest intact guardrail post, tested it twice, then began his descent into what felt like the mouth of winter itself. The slope tried to kill him 3 times in the first 30 feet. His boots slipped on hidden ice, sending him sliding 10 feet before the rope caught and jerked him to a halt that drove the air from his lungs. A rock that looked solid crumbled under his weight, nearly pitching him headfirst into a cluster of jagged stones below. The wind seemed to have personality and malice, shoving at him from different angles, trying to peel him off the mountainside like old paint. But Ethan had spent 5 years learning to function through fear, 5 years of waking up to an empty bed and a small boy who asked when mommy was coming home. 5 years of moving forward when every instinct screamed to curl up and surrender. He'd learned that you don't conquer fear, you just refuse to let it make your decisions. The SUV had come to rest against a cluster of pines about 60 feet down the slope, its front end accordioned around a boulder the size of a refrigerator. The driver's side was completely crushed, a tangle of metal and shattered glass that made Ethan's stomach turn. Nobody could have survived on that side. He worked his way around to the passenger side, where the damage was less severe. The window had shattered, and through the opening he could see her. She was maybe 35, dressed in what had probably been an expensive business suit before the crash had torn and bloodied it. Dark hair hung in her face, matted with blood from a gash across her forehead. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, shock written across her features in the slack set of her jaw and the shallow, rapid rhythm of her breathing. "Hey!" Ethan said, keeping his voice level and calm despite the adrenaline screaming through his system. "My name is Ethan. I'm going to get you out of here." Her eyes struggled to focus on him. My driver..." The words came out slurred, consciousness clearly fragile. Ethan shone his flashlight toward the driver's seat and immediately wished he hadn't. He turned back to the woman quickly. "We need to focus on you right now. Can you move your legs?" She seemed to think about this for a long moment, as if the question was in a foreign language. Finally, she shifted slightly, and Ethan saw her wince but successfully move both feet. "Good. That's good. Arms?" She lifted her right arm, then her left, though the latter movement brought a gasp of pain. "Probably dislocated shoulder," Ethan assessed, his construction site first aid training kicking in. "I'm going to open this door and get you out. It's going to hurt. I'm sorry, but we can't stay here." The door was jammed. The frame bent inward from the impact. Ethan braced his feet and pulled, muscles straining, the cold air burning his lungs as he fought against twisted metal and physics. The wind shrieked around them as if outraged that he dared to resist its claim on this life. The door gave way suddenly, nearly sending him sprawling. He caught himself and immediately leaned in, assessing how to move her without causing more damage. The seatbelt had locked during the crash, holding her in place, but also digging into her shoulder and chest hard enough to leave vicious bruising. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked the seatbelt release. "Vivian." The word came out barely above a whisper. "Vivian Cross." "Okay, Vivian, I need you to stay with me. Keep talking. Tell me about yourself." "I was meeting in Portland, driving back to Seattle. Jonathan said we should wait for morning, but I—" She trailed off, her eyes starting to drift closed. "Vivian," Ethan's sharp tone brought her back. "Stay awake. Tell me more. Who's Jonathan?" "My driver. He—" Understanding seemed to penetrate the shock. "He's dead, isn't he?" Ethan didn't answer directly. "Right now I need to focus on keeping you alive. We can't stay with the vehicle. The temperature's dropping fast, and there's no way a rescue team can reach us in this storm. There's an old logging cabin about half a mile east. I've used it before when weather trapped me on this route. We need to get there." I can't walk half a mile. I can barely think straight." "You don't have to walk," Ethan said, already maneuvering his arms under her legs and behind her back. "I'm going to carry you." "You can't carry someone my size that far in this storm." Ethan lifted her out of the vehicle, feeling her sharp intake of breath as the movement jostled her injured shoulder. She was lighter than he'd expected, though still a solid weight in his arms. "You'd be surprised what you can do when the alternative is freezing to death. Now hold on to me with your good arm, and whatever you do, don't let go." The climb back up to the road was infinitely worse carrying another person. The rope that had been his lifeline on the way down was now useless, and he had to pick his way up the treacherous slope with Vivian in his arms, every muscle screaming, his lungs burning with each breath of frozen air. Twice he slipped and barely caught himself, Vivian's body jarring against his chest. "Put me down," she murmured at one point. "You're going to kill yourself." "Not today," Ethan grunted, driving his boots into the snow and finding purchase on a buried root. "I made a promise 5 years ago that I'd never give up on someone again. I don't break promises." He didn't elaborate, and she was too far gone to ask, but those words seemed to pull from some reserve of strength he didn't know he still possessed. His thighs burned with the effort of climbing. His shoulders felt like they were tearing. His face had gone numb with cold minutes ago. None of it mattered. When he finally crested the ridge and made it back to the road, he wanted nothing more than to collapse and rest. Instead, he carried Vivian to his truck, carefully setting her in the passenger seat and cranking the heat as high as it would go. "Stay awake," he commanded, though her eyes were already drifting shut again. "Vivian, look at me." She forced her eyes open, and for the first time he really saw her, saw past the blood and the shock to the sharp intelligence underneath, currently drowning in pain and cold and trauma, but still there, still fighting. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," he said, "but I need you to fight. Can you do that?" "I ran a company worth $2 billion, she whispered. "I think I can stay awake for a car ride." Despite everything, Ethan felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "That's the spirit. Keep that attitude handy. You're going to need it." The drive to the cabin was a white-knuckle nightmare. The road had already accumulated 4 inches of fresh snow, and visibility was down to maybe 15 feet in front of the truck. Ethan drove by memory and instinct, recognizing landmarks more by their absence than their presence. The broken fence post that marked the old Henderson property, the split oak that had been struck by lightning 2 summers ago. Vivian drifted in and out of consciousness despite his repeated attempts to keep her talking. Each time her eyes closed, panic spiked through him. Hypothermia was setting in. He could see it in the way she'd stopped shivering, in the increasing slur of her words, in the bluish tint creeping into her lips. "Tell me about your company," he said, desperate to keep her engaged. "What do you do?" "Cross Industries, tech development, AI integration for—" She paused, struggling. "For infrastructure management, boring stuff. Jonathan always said I should work on my elevator pitch." Her words were running together now, consciousness fragmenting. Ethan pushed the truck harder, the engine whining in protest as he forced it through deepening snow. The turnoff for the cabin appeared suddenly, marked only by a gap in the tree line that most people wouldn't even notice. Ethan took it without hesitation, the truck's tires spinning briefly before finding traction on the forest road. This path was even worse than the highway, rutted and overgrown, designed for heavy logging equipment, not civilian vehicles in blizzard conditions. The cabin materialized out of the storm like something from a fever dream, a squat structure of weathered logs with a corrugated metal roof, windows boarded over, looking abandoned and possibly haunted. To Ethan, it looked like salvation. He parked as close to the door as possible, killed the engine, and turned to Vivian. She was unconscious now, her breathing shallow, her skin taking on a waxy quality that terrified him. "Not yet," he said, though she couldn't hear him. "You don't get to quit yet." He pulled her into his arms again, kicked open the truck door, and ran for the cabin through snow that was now well past his ankles. The cabin door was locked, but he'd broken into it enough times over the years that he knew the trick: shoulder hard against the upper panel while lifting up on the handle. The wood was swollen with moisture and age, but it gave way after the third hit, and they tumbled into the blessed stillness of shelter. The interior was exactly as Ethan remembered from the last time he'd taken refuge here: a single room with a fireplace, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, and a cot frame with no mattress. Decades-old graffiti covered the walls, messages from loggers long since retired or dead. There was a stack of firewood in the corner, probably left by the last person to use the place, and an old wool blanket hanging from a peg that smelled of mildew and mouse droppings, but would have to do. Ethan laid Vivian on the floor near the fireplace and went to work with frantic efficiency. First, fire. He still had the emergency kit, which included waterproof matches and fire starter tablets. Within minutes, he had flames crackling, their warmth beginning to push back against the cold that had invaded every corner of the cabin. Next, he turned his attention to Vivian. Her clothes were soaked through from the snow, and hypothermia protocol was clear: wet clothes had to go. He tried not to think about the implications, tried to see this as nothing more than a medical necessity, which is exactly what it was. "I'm sorry," he said, even though she couldn't hear him. "I'm just trying to keep you alive." He removed her torn suit jacket, her ruined blouse, working as quickly and clinically as possible. Her bra was also soaked, and after a moment's hesitation, he removed that too, immediately covering her with his own dry flannel shirt. He left her slacks on. They were damp but not soaked, and wrapped her in the musty blanket before turning his attention to her injuries. The gash on her forehead had mostly stopped bleeding, though it would definitely need stitches once they got proper medical attention. Her left shoulder was indeed dislocated. He could see the unnatural angle even through the shirt he'd draped over her. He had some experience with this from construction sites, but it wasn't something he wanted to attempt unless absolutely necessary. Her core temperature was the immediate concern. Even with the fire building, even wrapped in the blanket, she was still too cold, her body's ability to generate heat compromised by shock and injury. Ethan knew what the survival manual said, knew what any rational person trained in wilderness first aid would do in this situation. That didn't make the decision any easier. He stripped off his own wet outer layers, jacket, boots, socks, leaving only his jeans and undershirt. Then he lay down beside Vivian, pulling her against him and wrapping both of them in the blanket, sharing his body heat with hers in the most direct way possible. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't pleasant. Her skin was like ice against his, drawing the warmth from his body in a way that made him shiver. But he could feel her breathing, could feel the faint flutter of her heartbeat against his chest, and that was enough. "Come on, Vivian Cross, CEO of whatever company you said," he murmured against her hair. "You survived a wreck that should have killed you. You survived me hauling you up a mountain. Don't you dare give up now." Time lost meaning in the flickering firelight. Ethan fed the fire periodically, reluctant to leave Vivian but knowing they needed the heat. He assessed her injuries more thoroughly as she warmed, noting the extensive bruising across her ribs from the seatbelt, the swelling in her ankle, the countless cuts and scrapes that decorated her arms. The storm continued to rage outside, wind howling through gaps in the cabin's walls, snow piling against the boarded windows. The temperature inside climbed slowly, the fire's warmth gradually transforming the space from icebox to something approaching habitable. Vivian's breathing deepened, became more regular. Color began to return to her face, the dangerous waxy pallor fading to something closer to normal. Ethan allowed himself to hope that she might actually make it through this. He must have dozed off, exhaustion finally catching up with adrenaline, because the next thing he knew, someone was stirring against him, and a voice, stronger now, confused but conscious, was speaking. What happened? Ethan opened his eyes to find Vivian staring at him with a mixture of disorientation and dawning horror as she registered their situation. The unfamiliar cabin, the fire, the fact that she was wearing his shirt and nothing else, pressed against a strange man under a musty blanket. "It's okay," he said quickly, starting to pull away. "You're safe. You were in an accident, and you were going into hypothermia. I had to get you warm. I wasn't—" "The crash," she interrupted, memory flooding back. The horror on her face transformed into something deeper, darker. "Jonathan. Oh my God, Jonathan." "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "There was nothing. He has a wife, 2 kids. He sent me pictures last week of his daughter's soccer game." Tears began to stream down her face, and she tried to sit up, gasping as the movement sent pain lancing through her shoulder. "Easy," Ethan said, helping her settle back against the makeshift bedding he'd created from their coats. "Your shoulder's dislocated. Try not to move it." "Who are you?" she asked, looking at him properly for the first time. "Ethan Cole. I was driving back from a job site when I saw your vehicle go off the road. There's no cell service up here, and with the storm, there was no way to get you to a hospital. This cabin was the only shelter for miles." Vivian looked around the Spartan space, taking in the graffiti-covered walls, the ancient fireplace, the complete absence of modern amenities. "Where are we?" "Old logging cabin about half a mile from where you crashed. It's been abandoned for probably 20 years, but it's still structurally sound, and it has a fireplace. In a blizzard like this, that makes it a 5-star hotel." She started to laugh, then winced as the movement aggravated her injuries. "I was in a $10,000 suit this morning. Now I'm in an abandoned cabin wearing some stranger's shirt. For what it's worth, that suit was unsalvageable. And I'm sorry about everything. I did what I had to do to keep you from dying of hypothermia." Vivian looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw her truly processing the situation. The fire he'd built, the careful way he'd positioned her near the warmth, the fact that he'd given her his shirt, even though he was now sitting there in just an undershirt in a drafty cabin. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "I pulled you from a wreck and carried you to shelter. Nature and your own body did the rest." "Don't diminish it. I know what hypothermia means. I know—" She paused, clearly struggling with something. "I know what you had to do. Thank you for not making it weird." Despite the grimness of their situation, Ethan found himself smiling slightly. "You're welcome, though I have to say this is definitely the weirdest Tuesday I've had in a while." "It's Tuesday?" "Was when we started this adventure. Might be Wednesday by now." He glanced toward the boarded windows, where wind still howled and snow still fell. "Storm's not letting up. We're going to be here for a while." "My company," Vivian said, trying again to sit up. "I have meetings tomorrow, a board presentation. I need to—" "You need to stay still and let your body recover," Ethan interrupted firmly. "Whatever meetings you have, they'll survive without you. You almost didn't survive tonight. Priorities." She looked like she wanted to argue, but another wave of pain from her shoulder seemed to convince her of the wisdom in his words. She settled back, pulling the blanket more tightly around herself. "You mentioned a promise," she said after a moment. "When you were carrying me up the slope, you said you made a promise 5 years ago." Ethan fed another log into the fire, not looking at her. "My wife died 5 years ago. Went through the ice on Clearwater Lake. I was there. I should have gone in after her right away, but I hesitated, froze up. By the time I moved, it was too late." He finally met her eyes. "I promised myself I'd never hesitate again. Never let fear make me a coward. So when I saw your vehicle go off the road, there wasn't really a choice. There was just what needed to be done." Vivian was quiet for a long time, firelight dancing across her features, revealing and concealing emotions too complex to name. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Me too." Ethan paused. "I have a son, Jamie. He's 7. Staying with my sister tonight because I took a late job. He's probably worried sick by now, but there's no way to contact anyone until this storm clears. What do you do? For work, I mean. Construction. Mostly residential, some commercial. I'm a Finnish carpenter by trade, but I take what I can get. Single dad with a mortgage, you know how it is. I really don't, Vivian admitted. My life was very different from that. Board meetings and earnings calls and strategic partnerships. I haven't worried about a mortgage in 15 years. Then what were you doing driving through a blizzard instead of waiting for morning? She was quiet for so long that Ethan thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, "Because waiting feels like weakness. Because I've built an entire empire on the principle that I don't let weather or circumstances or other people's caution dictate my choices. Because," she laughed bitterly, "because I'm an idiot who valued getting back to Seattle 3 hours earlier over the life of my driver. You didn't cause the storm." "No, but I caused us to be in it. Jonathan told me we should wait. I overruled him. I always overrule everyone." Tears began again, silent and devastating. "He has a wife. 2 little kids who are going to grow up without their father because I couldn't stand the idea of spending a night in Portland." Ethan moved closer, not touching her, but near enough to offer presence. "What happened tonight was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident. But weather is unpredictable. Roads are unpredictable. You can make every right choice and still have things go wrong. Is that what you tell yourself about your wife?" The question was sharp, almost cruel, but Ethan heard the pain underneath it, the desperate need to share the guilt with someone who might understand. "No," he said honestly. "I tell myself that I failed her, that I let fear win, that a better man, a braver man would have saved her. And then I get up the next morning and make breakfast for my son and go to work, because that's what you do. You carry it. You don't get to put it down." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the wind howling, 2 strangers bound together by circumstance and tragedy and the strange intimacy that comes from survival. "Your shoulder needs to be set," Ethan said eventually. "I've done it before, but it's going to hurt. A lot." "More than it hurts now." "Briefly, yes, but then it'll feel better, relatively speaking." Vivian closed her eyes, breathed deeply, then nodded. "Do it." Ethan positioned himself carefully, one hand on her upper arm, the other supporting her shoulder. "On 3. 1, 2. He pulled on 2, not 3, because people always tensed on 3. The shoulder joint relocated with an audible pop that made his own stomach turn. Vivian's scream echoed through the cabin, raw and primal, but mercifully brief. "You son of a—" she gasped. "You said 3." "I lied. People tense up on 3. Makes it harder." He was already tearing strips from his ruined jacket to fashion a sling. "How does it feel?" "Like someone just yanked my arm off and stuck it back on slightly wrong. But also, better." "Is that possible?" "That's possible." He finished the sling and helped her ease her arm into it. "Try not to move it for at least a few days." "A few days? I need to be back in Seattle tomorrow." "Vivian." Ethan kept his voice gentle but firm. "Look outside. Listen to that wind. We're not going anywhere tomorrow. We're going to be lucky if we can get out of here in 2 days. Maybe 3. Her face went through several emotions in rapid succession: denial, anger, fear, and finally resignation. "I've never been trapped anywhere in my life. There's a first time for everything. I don't have clothes or food or my phone or anything. I have some emergency rations in my truck, not gourmet, but they'll keep us alive. As for clothes," he looked at her wearing his flannel shirt, which hung off her frame like a dress. "We'll figure something out." "This is insane. This whole situation is completely insane." "Welcome to nature. She doesn't care about your schedule or your company or your $10,000 suits. She just is." Vivian started to laugh, a slightly hysterical edge to it that worried Ethan until he realized she was also crying, the laughter and tears mixing together into something that was neither but both. "I'm sorry," she said finally, wiping her eyes with her good hand. "I'm not usually this—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "Emotional." You survived a crash that killed your driver, got hauled up a mountain by a stranger, had your shoulder relocated without anesthesia, and learned you're trapped in an abandoned cabin for the foreseeable future. I think you're entitled to some emotions. When you put it that way, she pulled the blanket more tightly around herself. Thank you. For everything. For risking your life to save mine. For being decent about all of this. For not being weird or creepy or... I have a 7-year-old son, Ethan said quietly. I'd like to think that if I died tomorrow, someone would show his mother the same respect and care that I'm showing you. Basic human decency isn't something to be thanked for. It should just be the baseline. You'd be surprised how rare it actually is. In my world, anyway. Maybe you're in the wrong world. She considered this, firelight casting shadows across her face. Maybe I am. The night deepened around them, the storm showing no signs of abating. Ethan made a trip out to his truck, braving the wind and snow to retrieve the emergency rations, a few bottles of water, and an extra blanket he kept in the back. By the time he returned, teeth chattering and covered in fresh snow, Vivian had managed to scoot herself closer to the fire. I thought you'd frozen out there, she said. Not yet, though I'm starting to understand how it happens. The cold doesn't hurt after a while. It just makes you want to lie down and sleep. That's horrifying. That's hypothermia, your body's way of giving up. He shook the snow from his hair and joined her by the fire, unpacking the meager supplies. We've got protein bars, trail mix, and beef jerky. Not exactly 5-star dining. At this point, I'd eat cardboard. She accepted a protein bar and examined it like it was an alien artifact. I haven't eaten one of these since college. They taste pretty much the same, which is to say, terrible. They ate in companionable silence, the simple act of consuming calories bringing a measure of normalcy to their surreal situation. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault on the mountain, but inside the fire held, and they were warm and alive and together. Tell me about your son, Vivian said after a while. Jamie, right? Ethan's face softened in a way that transformed him, grief and worry giving way to pure love. He's 7. Smart as hell, probably too smart for his own good. Wants to be a paleontologist this week, though last week it was an astronaut, and the week before that a pizza chef. Ambitious. He doesn't know how to be anything else. He's got his mother's fire, her absolute refusal to accept limitations. Ethan paused. He asks about her sometimes, wants to know what she was like, what she would think of him, and I tell him she would be proud, that she would love the person he's becoming. Does he remember her? Barely. He was 2 when she died. He has more photographs than memories. The pain in Ethan's voice was palpable. Sometimes I wonder if that's a mercy, if it's easier to miss someone you never really knew. It's not, Vivian said quietly. My father died when I was 8. I remember just enough to know what I lost, but not enough to really have had him. It's its own kind of torture. I'm sorry. Me too. She shifted position, wincing as the movement aggravated her various injuries. He's why I built the company, you know. My father. He was brilliant, but broke his whole life because he trusted the wrong people. Made handshake deals that fell apart, believed in others' promises. I swore I'd never be vulnerable like that. Never depend on anyone. Build something so solid that it couldn't be taken away by someone else's weakness or betrayal. Sounds lonely. It is, but it's safe. Safe and lonely or vulnerable and connected. Hell of a choice. Vivian looked at him with something that might have been respect. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know, someone simpler, I guess. No offense. None taken. I'm a carpenter who drives a 10-year-old truck and lives in a 3-bedroom ranch with a mortgage I'll probably be paying off until I die. Not exactly complicated. That's what I mean, though. You're not simple at all. She struggled for the words. You're complicated in quiet ways, in ways people probably don't see unless they're trapped in a cabin with you during a blizzard. Is that a compliment? I think it is. The conversation drifted into silence again, but it was comfortable now. The earlier tension dissolved into something approaching understanding. Ethan added more wood to the fire and checked the boards over the windows, ensuring no snow was finding its way inside. Vivian dozed intermittently, her body's need for rest overriding her mind's desire to stay alert. Around what Ethan guessed was 3 in the morning, she woke with a start, crying out from what must have been a nightmare. He was at her side immediately, not touching, but present. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You're in the cabin. The storm's still going, but you're safe." "I dreamed I was still in the car," she whispered. Trapped. Jonathan was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear him over the wind. It was just a dream. Was it? He tried to tell me we should wait. I didn't listen. That's not a dream. That's just what happened. Ethan sat down beside her, their shoulders almost touching. When Sarah died, I had nightmares for 2 years. Every night, the same dream. I'm standing on the ice, she's calling for help, and I'm frozen. Can't move, can't speak, just watching her drown. And every morning I'd wake up hating myself a little more. How did you stop? I didn't. The dreams just changed. Now sometimes I save her, sometimes I don't. But I'm always moving, always trying. That's what changed, I think. In real life, I finally started trying again. Started being the person who moves instead of freezes. And the dreams followed. So I just have to live with this. For a while, yeah. And then maybe you don't. Or maybe you do, but it doesn't control you anymore. Either way, you survive it. One night at a time. Vivian leaned against him then, just slightly, her good shoulder resting against his. It was the first voluntary physical contact between them, a gesture of trust and exhaustion and desperate need for human comfort. "I'm cold," she admitted, "even with the fire. I'm still cold." Ethan understood what she was asking, what she needed, and what it cost her to admit it. He lay back down, pulling her with him, sharing his warmth as he had hours earlier when she was unconscious. But this was different. This was choice. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Anytime." They lay like that as the storm raged on, two people who had been strangers 12 hours ago, now bound together by survival and circumstance, and the strange alchemy that happens when walls come down and pretense becomes impossible. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and somewhere in the darkness, dawn was coming, though they couldn't see it yet. Morning arrived not with light, but with a subtle shift in the quality of darkness. The wind had finally exhausted itself sometime in the early hours, leaving behind an eerie stillness that felt almost unnatural after the relentless howling. Ethan woke first, careful not to disturb Vivian, who was still pressed against him, her breathing deep and even, with genuine sleep, rather than the shallow unconsciousness of shock. The fire had burned down to embers during the night. He extracted himself slowly from their shared warmth and rebuilt it, coaxing flames back to life with practiced efficiency. His body ached from sleeping on the hard floor, from the exertion of the rescue, from muscles held tense against the cold for too many hours. But they were alive, and in the unforgiving arithmetic of survival, that was the only number that mattered. Vivian stirred as the fire began to throw real heat again, her eyes opening with that moment of disorientation that comes from waking in an unfamiliar place. He watched recognition settle over her features. The cabin, the storm, the crash, all of it flooding back in a sequence that transformed her expression from confused to devastated in the space of a heartbeat. "It wasn't a dream," she said quietly. "No, I'm sorry." She sat up slowly, testing her injuries with the caution of someone learning the new limits of their body. The makeshift sling still held her arm secure, and though she was clearly in pain, she seemed more present than she had been the night before, shock receding to reveal the sharper edges of grief and guilt. "How long did we sleep?" Ethan checked his watch, one of the few pieces of technology that didn't require cell service or electricity. "About 4 hours. It's just past 7. My head of operations will have called the police by now. When I didn't show up for the morning briefing, didn't answer my phone." She looked toward the boarded windows, where weak gray light was beginning to filter through gaps in the wood. "They'll be looking for me. They won't find us until this storm clears enough for helicopters or snowmobiles. The roads are impassable, and even if they weren't, nobody knows we're here. This cabin isn't on any maps. It's not supposed to exist anymore. So we just wait. We wait. And we stay warm and fed and alive so that when rescue does come, we can walk out of here under our own power." He handed her a bottle of water and a protein bar. "Breakfast." She accepted them without complaint, though he could see her eyeing the protein bar with the same skepticism as the night before. I usually have Greek yogurt and fresh berries, prepared by my private chef. Well, your private chef didn't get trapped in a blizzard, so I'd say he made the better choice. Despite everything, she smiled. Fair point. She bit into the protein bar and made a face. These really haven't improved since college. Some things are timeless in their terribleness. They ate in silence for a while, the mundane act of breakfast creating a pocket of normalcy in their surreal situation. Outside, the world was utterly quiet. The kind of deep silence that only comes after heavy snow has blanketed everything, muffling sound itself. Tell me honestly, Vivian said, setting down the half-eaten protein bar. How bad is our situation? Ethan considered lying, softening the truth, but something about the directness in her eyes told him she'd see through it and resent him for trying. We have enough food and water for maybe 3 days if we're careful. The firewood will last about the same. After that, things get complicated, but the storm can't last forever. Weather reports before I lost cell service said it would blow through in 24 to 48 hours. And if it doesn't, then I'll need to make a trek back to my truck, see if I can get it started, try to reach a point where there's cell service. But that's worst-case scenario thinking. Let's focus on getting through today first. Vivian nodded, processing this information with the same analytical focus she probably brought to board meetings and business negotiations. What can I do to help? Even with one functional arm, I should be useful for something. You can help me inventory our supplies more carefully, and later, if you're feeling up to it, you can tell me more about your company. I'm curious what someone builds that's worth $2 billion. You really want to hear about enterprise AI integration and infrastructure management protocols? I really want to hear about something other than the storm and our situation for a while. Distraction is underrated as a survival tool. So she told him. At first, her explanations were guarded, corporate speak carefully designed to reveal nothing of substance. But as the morning wore on and they settled into the rhythm of talking, her language shifted. She began to describe not just what Cross Industries did, but why it mattered to her, the vision she'd had of making cities smarter and more responsive, of reducing waste and improving lives through technology that learned and adapted. My father would have loved it, she said at one point, staring into the fire. He was always talking about how the world needed better systems, better ways of organizing complexity, but he never had the resources or the ruthlessness to actually build anything that lasted. And you do. Have the ruthlessness, I mean. I did. I thought I did. She touched her injured shoulder gingerly. Now I'm not sure what I have. A dead employee. A company that's probably in chaos. A shoulder that might never work properly again. The shoulder will heal. So will you. The rest? Ethan fed another log to the fire. The rest you'll figure out when you're not trapped in a cabin fighting to survive. Priorities, remember? You keep saying that, priorities. Because it's true. When Sarah died, I wanted to fall apart. Wanted to just stop functioning and let the grief consume me. But I had a 2-year-old who needed breakfast and clean clothes and someone to read him stories at night, so that became the priority. Everything else, the grief, the guilt, the rage at a universe that would take away someone so good, all of that had to wait. And eventually, I learned to carry it all at once. The love for my son and the pain of losing my wife. They both just became part of who I am. Vivian was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that. You don't have to be strong. You just have to keep breathing, keep moving forward. Strength is overrated. Persistence is what actually matters. Is that what you tell yourself? Every single day. The conversation drifted into more neutral territory after that. Movies they'd seen, books they'd read, places they'd traveled. Ethan was surprised to discover that beneath the corporate armor, Vivian had a sharp sense of humor and a genuine curiosity about the world. She asked him about carpentry with what seemed like real interest, wanting to know about the satisfaction of building something with his hands, of seeing raw materials transformed into functional beauty. I always envied people who could make physical things, she admitted. My work is so abstract, lines of code, algorithmic models, predictive analytics. Nothing you can touch or see. Sometimes I wonder if I'm actually building anything real or just elaborate castles made of data. Does it help people? It should. That's the theory, anyway. Optimize traffic flows, reduce energy waste, predict infrastructure failures before they happen. But I'm so far removed from the actual implementation that I never see the results. Just quarterly earnings reports and board presentations. Sounds lonely. You said that last night, too. It's still true. She shifted position, stretching her legs out toward the fire. What about you? Is your life lonely? Single father, working construction, living in a town small enough that everyone probably knows everyone else's business? Sometimes, Ethan admitted. Dating is complicated when you have a kid. Most women either want to be an instant mother, which is too much too fast, or they're not interested in being any kind of mother, which makes the whole thing pointless. And Jamie has to come first. Always. So yeah, it gets lonely. But I have my son, and I have work I'm good at, and I have a sister who helps when I need it. That's more than a lot of people have. Do you think you'll ever get married again? The question surprised him with its directness. I don't know. I loved Sarah completely. The idea of trying to find that again, of opening myself up to that kind of loss. He shook his head. Some days I think I'd rather just be alone. It's safer. Safe and lonely, Vivian echoed his words from the night before. Seems to be a theme for both of us. Maybe that's why we're here. Universe deciding we both needed to learn something about vulnerability. If that's true, the universe has a terrible sense of timing and an even worse teaching methodology. Ethan laughed, surprised by the sound of it. Can't argue with that. Around noon, though time had become somewhat abstract in the windowless cabin, Vivian asked about Jamie again, and Ethan found himself telling stories he hadn't shared with anyone outside his immediate family. The time Jamie had tried to build a dinosaur trap in the backyard and caught the neighbor's cat instead. The parent-teacher conference where his son had very seriously explained his theory that all math was just counting in different languages. The bedtime ritual of making up increasingly ridiculous stories about a superhero named Captain Pancake who fought crime with breakfast foods. He sounds wonderful, Vivian said, and there was something wistful in her tone that made Ethan look at her more carefully. You don't have kids? No, never wanted them. Or thought I didn't. My work was always the priority, and children seemed incompatible with the life I was building. Now I'm 36, and I'm starting to wonder if I made the right choice. You're 36, not 96. Plenty of people have kids later than that. Not people who work 80-hour weeks and measure success in market share and quarterly growth. What kind of mother would I be? I'd probably schedule quality time in my calendar and delegate bedtime stories to a nanny. Or you'd surprise yourself. People change when they have to, when they want to. Do they? Or do they just become more entrenched versions of what they already were? It was a genuine question, not rhetorical, and Ethan took his time answering. I think people can change if they have a good enough reason. Sarah's death changed me, made me more present, more careful, more aware of how fragile everything is. But it also made me more scared, more protective, sometimes too protective. So maybe we just become different versions of ourselves. Not better or worse, just different. That's either very wise or very depressing. Why can't it be both? She laughed at that, a real laugh that transformed her face, grief and pain temporarily forgotten. You're an interesting man, Ethan Cole. I'm really not. I'm exactly as boring as I seem. The only interesting thing that's ever happened to me is this, and I'd happily trade interesting for boring if it meant you weren't hurt and Jonathan was still alive. The mention of her driver sobered them both instantly. Vivian's face closed off, the brief moment of lightness extinguished like a candle in wind. I need to tell his wife, she said quietly. When we get out of here, before anything else, I need to go to her and explain what happened. Tell her that it was my fault, my decision to drive through the storm. It was an accident, Vivian. The roads were icy, the visibility was terrible. That's not your fault. I made the choice to be on that road. He was there because I ordered him to drive. How is that not my fault? By that logic, every employer is responsible for every accident that happens to every employee ever. You can't control ice, you can't control weather. You made a decision that seemed reasonable at the time, and circumstances conspired to make it tragic. That's not the same as being at fault. You're being too kind. I'm being honest. There's a difference between responsibility and fault. You're responsible for the decision to drive. The weather is at fault for what happened. Both things can be true. Vivian wiped at her eyes with her good hand. Does it get easier? The guilt? No, but you get stronger at carrying it. That's not the same as easier, but it's something. They fell into silence again, but it was heavier now, weighted with grief and philosophy and questions that had no good answers. Ethan checked their supplies, rationing out another small meal, then spent time reinforcing the boards over the windows where wind had loosened them during the night. Physical work helped, giving his hands something to do while his mind processed the strange intimacy developing between them. Vivian watched him work, and he was conscious of her eyes on him in a way that made him self-conscious. When he finally sat back down by the fire, she spoke. Can I ask you something personal? We've spent the night pressed together, sharing body heat. I think we're past the point of too personal. Fair enough. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Last night, when you had to remove my wet clothes and share the blanket, were you attracted to me? Even a little? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with complexity and vulnerability. Ethan met her eyes directly. Yes, he said simply. You're a beautiful woman. But that's not what that moment was about. Noticing that someone is attractive and acting on it are completely different things. I needed to keep you alive. Everything else was noise. Thank you for being honest and for being decent. You keep thanking me for basic human behavior. Your standards for men must be pretty low. You'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't. She pulled the blanket more tightly around herself. I've dated powerful men, wealthy men, men who seemed perfect on paper, and almost without exception, they saw me as either a conquest or a competition, someone to defeat or someone to possess, never just as a person. Then you've been dating the wrong men. Clearly. Though in my defense, the right men don't usually move in the same circles as billionaire CEOs. Lucky for them. She smiled at that. You don't like rich people much, do you? I don't dislike them. I just don't find wealth particularly interesting. Some of the best people I know are broke. Some of the worst people I know have more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. The numbers in your bank account don't tell me anything useful about who you are. What does tell you something useful? How you treat people who can't do anything for you. How you handle failure. Whether you take responsibility for your mistakes. What you do when nobody's watching. He paused. And whether you can admit when you're scared. I'm terrified, Vivian said quietly. Right now, in this cabin, with you. I'm absolutely terrified. Of me? No. Of this. Of feeling comfortable with someone I just met. Of wanting to keep talking to you even though we're trapped here. Of the fact that in less than 24 hours, you've seen me more clearly than people I've known for years. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I'm terrified that when we leave here, I'll go back to my company and my board meetings and my empty penthouse, and I'll forget what this feels like. Being real, being seen, being with someone who doesn't want anything from me except for me to stay alive. Ethan moved closer, not quite touching her, but near enough that his presence offered comfort. You won't forget. This isn't the kind of thing people forget. How do you know? Because 5 years later, I can still feel the exact texture of the ice under my hands when I tried to reach Sarah, can still hear the sound it made when it cracked. Some moments burn themselves into you so completely that they become part of your foundation. This is one of those moments for both of us. That's not exactly comforting. No, but it's true. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the cabin creaking slightly as the wood contracted in the cold. Outside, the world remained frozen and still, a landscape transformed into something alien and beautiful and deadly. Tell me more about Jamie, Vivian said eventually. I want to hear more stories. So Ethan talked, pulling up memories like photographs from a treasured album. He told her about teaching his son to ride a bike, about the solemn concentration on Jamie's face as he'd pedaled independently for the first time, about the elaborate fort they'd built in the living room one rainy weekend, using every blanket and cushion in the house. About the questions Jamie asked that had no good answers. Why do people die? Where did Mommy go? Will you die too someday? What do you tell him when he asks those questions? The truth, as best I can. That people die because our bodies stop working. That his mom is gone, and I miss her too, and it's okay to be sad about that. That yes, I'll die someday, but hopefully not for a very long time, and until then I'm going to be here for him every single day. That must be hard, being both parents. Some days it's impossible. I mess up constantly, lose my patience when I shouldn't, forget things I promised to remember, struggle to explain concepts I barely understand myself. But I show up, every morning, every night, through good days and terrible ones. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. The afternoon wore on, and with nothing to do but wait and talk, they did exactly that. Vivian told him about building her company from nothing, about the early days when it was just her and two programmers working out of a garage, surviving on ramen and ambition. About the first major contract that had validated everything she'd worked for. About the moment when she realized she'd built something that would outlast her, that had value beyond her own need to prove herself. But somewhere along the way it stopped being about the vision and started being about the empire, she admitted. About growth for its own sake, market dominance, crushing competitors. I forgot why I started in the first place. It's not too late to remember, isn't it? I'm the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I have shareholders and board members and quarterly earnings expectations. I can't just decide to prioritize meaning over profit. Why not? The question stopped her cold. Because that's not how it works. Because I have responsibilities. Because people depend on me. And what about you? Who do you depend on? She had no answer for that. As evening approached and shadows began to gather in the corners of the cabin despite the fire's light, Ethan noticed Vivian shivering again. The temperature had dropped with the sun, and their supplies of firewood, while adequate, weren't infinite. We should probably do what we did last night, he said carefully. Share body heat. It's going to be another cold one. Vivian nodded, no hesitation this time, and they arranged themselves by the fire with the blankets wrapped around them both. The position was familiar now, comfortable in a way that should have been strange given how recently they'd met. Ethan? Her voice was quiet in the gathering darkness. Yeah? Thank you for not making this weird, for treating me like a person instead of a situation to manage or a problem to solve. You are a person. That's not something you need to thank me for recognizing. She was quiet for a moment, then said, When we get out of here, can I meet Jamie? I'd like to meet the person you talk about with so much love. The request surprised him, touched something deep in his chest that he'd carefully guarded for 5 years. I'd like that. He'd probably have about 1,000 questions for you. Fair warning. I can handle a 7-year-old's questions. Might be easier than board meetings. Don't be so sure. Jamie once asked me to explain why clouds float and got progressively more disappointed with each answer I gave. He's a tough crowd. They talked through the evening, through the slow descent of full darkness, through the point where conversation gave way to comfortable silence. The fire burned low, and Ethan added more wood, their precious supply diminishing but still adequate for another day. Maybe 2 if they were careful. Vivian fell asleep before he did, her breathing deepening, her weight settling more fully against him. Ethan stayed awake longer, keeping watch over the fire, over her, over their small pocket of warmth and safety in the midst of the frozen mountain. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tomorrow they'd have to make decisions about whether to wait or try to reach help. Tomorrow, the real world would start asserting itself again, with all its complications and demands. But tonight, in this moment, they were simply 2 people keeping each other alive, and that was enough. Ethan closed his eyes and let sleep take him, the sound of Vivian's breathing a counterpoint to the crackling fire, both of them holding on to warmth and life, and the fragile connection they'd built in the space between disaster and survival. The second morning began with a sound that didn't belong to the wilderness, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the still air. Ethan was awake instantly, already moving toward the door before his conscious mind fully processed what he was hearing. Vivian stirred beside the fire, disoriented and reaching instinctively for him before remembering where she was. Is that search and rescue? Ethan confirmed, already pulling on his boots. Stay here. Keep the fire going. I need to signal them. He grabbed the emergency flare from his kit and burst out of the cabin into a world transformed. The storm had deposited at least 3 feet of fresh snow, turning the landscape into an endless expanse of white, punctuated only by the dark spikes of pine trees. The sky above was clear and painfully blue, the kind of crystalline winter morning that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. The helicopter was still distant, its search pattern taking it along the highway corridor. Ethan waded through snow that came up past his knees, fighting toward the small clearing in front of the cabin where he'd have the best chance of being seen. His fingers were already going numb as he fumbled with the flare, the cold biting through his inadequate clothing. He fired the flare skyward, watching the bright red streak arc against the blue, a man-made star burning its brief and desperate message into the winter air. For a terrible moment, he thought they hadn't seen it, that the helicopter would continue its pattern and disappear over the ridge. But then the rotor's pitch changed, the aircraft banking sharply and heading directly toward them. "They saw us!" he shouted back toward the cabin, where Vivian had appeared in the doorway despite his instructions to stay inside. "They're coming!" Relief flooded through him so powerfully it was almost painful, the tension of the past 36 hours releasing all at once. They were going to be okay. They were going to get out of here. Jamie would get his father back, and Vivian would get proper medical care, and this strange pocket of existence they'd been trapped in would finally end. The helicopter set down in the clearing with practiced precision, its rotors whipping up clouds of powder snow that momentarily obscured everything. 2 paramedics emerged, running toward them with equipment and purpose, their movements efficient and professional. "How many injured?" the first one called out, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that were already assessing the situation. 1. Female, mid-30s. Vehicle accident 36 hours ago. Dislocated shoulder that's been set, possible broken ribs, lacerations, hypothermia treated in the field. She's been stable for the past day. The paramedic's eyebrows rose slightly at the clinical precision of his report. "You have medical training?" "Construction site first aid. I've seen enough accidents to know the basics." "You did good, real good." She was already moving past him toward the cabin where her partner was helping Vivian outside. "Let's get her loaded and check you out too." "I'm fine. She's the priority." "You're both coming. No arguments. You've been exposed to the same conditions she has, and you just spent 2 nights in sub-zero temperatures. You're getting checked whether you like it or not." Ethan wanted to argue but recognized the futility. Instead, he followed them to the helicopter, watching as they efficiently secured Vivian to a stretcher despite her protests that she could walk. Her eyes found his as they loaded her into the aircraft, and something passed between them: gratitude, recognition, a wordless acknowledgement of what they'd shared in that cabin. The flight to the hospital took 20 minutes that felt both endless and far too brief. Ethan found himself simultaneously desperate to get back to Jamie and reluctant to leave this liminal space where the normal rules of the world didn't quite apply. The paramedics worked on Vivian during the flight, checking vitals, starting an IV, asking questions she answered with increasing clarity as the shock of rescue wore off. "There was a driver," she said at one point, her voice cutting through the helicopter's noise. "In the vehicle. He didn't make it. Someone needs to recover him." The female paramedic nodded, her expression professionally sympathetic. "We'll relay that information. They'll send a team as soon as conditions allow. I'm sorry for your loss." Vivian's face crumpled briefly before she mastered herself, and Ethan wanted to reach across the space between them and offer comfort. But they were back in the world now, the world where he was a carpenter who'd happened upon an accident and she was a CEO being rescued from disaster, and the intimacy of the cabin already felt like something from another lifetime. The hospital was chaos dressed up as controlled efficiency. They were separated immediately. Vivian whisked away to examination rooms while Ethan was subjected to his own battery of tests. Temperature, blood pressure, examination of his hands and feet for frostbite, questions about symptoms of hypothermia or exposure. Through it all, he kept asking about Jamie, desperate to call his sister, to hear his son's voice. Finally, a nurse took pity on him and brought him a phone. His sister answered on the first ring. "Ethan? Oh my God, Ethan, where have you been? The police came by yesterday asking if I'd heard from you. They found your truck on Highway 29, but no sign of—" "I'm okay, Beth. I'm at Mercy General in Portland. There was an accident. A woman went off the road during the storm, and I couldn't leave her. We sheltered in the old logging cabin until search and rescue could reach us. You found someone in that blizzard and stayed with them for 2 days? Ethan, you could have died. But I didn't. Is Jamie okay? Can I talk to him? He's at school. Ethan, he's been so worried. When you didn't come home Monday night and your phone went straight to voicemail, and then the police showed up, I tried to keep it together for him, but he knew something was wrong. Guilt crashed through Ethan like a physical force. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll make it up to him, I promise. Can you pick him up from school and bring him here? I need to see him. Of course. We'll be there in an hour. Ethan, I'm so glad you're okay. Me too. He hung up and sat in the examination room, suddenly feeling every hour of the past 2 days in his bones. A doctor came by eventually, pronounced him remarkably healthy considering what he'd been through, and suggested he stick around for observation for a few more hours just to be safe. Ethan agreed, partly because arguing seemed exhausting, and partly because he wanted to check on Vivian before he left. Finding her proved more difficult than expected. The hospital staff was tight-lipped about patient information, and it took some persistence before a sympathetic nurse finally told him she'd been moved to a private room on the 4th floor. He made his way there, feeling increasingly out of place in his borrowed hospital scrubs, aware that he probably smelled like wood smoke and old cabin and hadn't seen a shower in days. The room was typical of expensive private care, more like a hotel suite than a hospital room, with wood-grain floors and a flat-screen television and furniture that looked like it came from a catalog rather than medical supply. Vivian was sitting up in bed, her shoulder properly immobilized now in a professional brace, an IV in her arm, looking both better and worse than she had in the cabin. Better because she was clean and properly treated. Worse because she'd put her armor back on, the corporate mask settling over her features in a way that made her seem like a stranger. "Hey," he said from the doorway. "Mind if I come in?" Her face transformed when she saw him, the mask dropping away to reveal genuine pleasure mixed with something that looked like relief. "Ethan, please. I was hoping you'd come by before you left." He entered the room, suddenly uncertain about everything. In the cabin, they'd achieved a strange kind of equality born from shared survival. Here, the differences between them were glaringly obvious. Her private room and his county hospital examination, her expensive care and his basic insurance, her world and his. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Like I got hit by a truck, which technically, I suppose I did. The doctors say the shoulder will need surgery, but it should heal completely. The ribs are bruised but not broken. Everything else is just cuts and bruises and—" She trailed off, the unspoken weight of Jonathan's death hanging between them. "Have they contacted his family?" "Yes. His wife is here, actually, in the hospital. I spoke with her briefly before they sedated me for the shoulder reduction." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes. "She was so gracious about it, so kind. She held my hand and told me it wasn't my fault, and all I could think was that she shouldn't be comforting me. I should be comforting her. Her husband is dead because of my decisions." "Vivian, I know what you're going to say, that it was an accident, that I couldn't have known. But that doesn't change the fact that he's dead and I'm alive, and his kids are going to grow up without a father." Ethan reached out and took her hand, the gesture feeling both natural and presumptuous. "You're right. Nothing I say will change that. But punishing yourself won't bring him back either. The only thing you can do now is honor his memory by living better, being better, making different choices." "How? How do I even begin to do that?" "One decision at a time, starting with the next one." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In the cabin, you talked about forgetting why you started your company, about losing the vision in pursuit of the empire. Maybe this is your chance to find it again. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's probably the hardest thing you'll ever do. But you survived a crash that killed your driver. You survived hypothermia. You survived 2 nights in an abandoned cabin with a stranger. If you can survive all that, you can survive changing the direction of your life." Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tight around his. "Will I see you again? After today?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and complications. Ethan thought about his life, the small house, the modest income, the 7-year-old who was his entire world. He thought about her life, the boardrooms and the billions, the power and the pressure. They came from different universes that had briefly intersected in a moment of crisis. "I'd like that," he said honestly, "but I don't know what that would look like. Our lives are pretty different." "They are. But maybe—" She hesitated, vulnerability flickering across her features. "Maybe different is exactly what I need. You told me in the cabin that I could meet Jamie. Did you mean it?" "I meant it. Though fair warning, he's going to ask you approximately 1 million questions about your helicopter rescue. He's obsessed with helicopters." "I think I can handle that." She smiled, but it faded quickly. "My assistant is on the way here with my phone and my laptop. As soon as I'm released, I'll be buried in crisis management and damage control and all the things that have piled up over the past 2 days. It would be very easy to let this moment disappear. To go back to my life and let you go back to yours and pretend the cabin never happened. Is that what you want?" "No. But I'm scared that it's what will happen anyway. That the gravity of my normal life will pull me back in, and I'll lose whatever clarity I found in that cabin." Before Ethan could respond, the door opened and a woman in an expensive suit entered, carrying a leather bag that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. She stopped short when she saw him, her expression flickering through surprise and suspicion before settling on professional neutrality. "Miss Cross? I'm so relieved you're all right. When we got the news about the accident, the entire office—" She noticed Ethan again. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had a visitor. Should I come back?" "No, Claire, it's fine. This is Ethan Cole. He saved my life. Ethan, this is Claire Morrison, my executive assistant and general keeper of my sanity." Claire's expression shifted immediately to something approaching awe. "Mr. Cole, I can't thank you enough for what you did. If you hadn't found her, if you hadn't—" She blinked rapidly, emotion breaking through the professional facade. "We're all incredibly grateful." "I'm glad I could help," Ethan said, feeling awkward under her intensity. Claire set the leather bag on the bedside table and immediately went into efficiency mode, pulling out devices and chargers with practiced precision. "I have your phone, your laptop, your tablet. The board has been calling constantly. Michael wants to schedule an emergency meeting as soon as you're feeling up to it. The press has gotten wind of the accident, so we're going to need to draft a statement. And Jonathan's wife, she asked if you'd be willing to speak at the funeral. It's scheduled for Saturday." Ethan watched Vivian's face as Claire talked, saw the weight settling back onto her shoulders, the corporate mask reasserting itself with each piece of information. This was her world, and he was watching her disappear back into it in real time. "I'll speak at the funeral," Vivian said quietly. "As for the rest, tell Michael I'll be available for a meeting on Monday. Not before. Tell the press that I'm recovering and grateful to the rescue teams and to the stranger who stayed with me. Don't mention Ethan by name unless he gives permission." "Actually," Ethan stood, recognizing a cue when he saw one, "I should go. My sister is bringing my son, and I want to be ready when he gets here." "Of course." Vivian's eyes met his, and he saw pleading in them, a silent request not to let this be the end. "Thank you for everything. Take care of yourself, Vivian." He meant it to sound casual, but heard the weight in his own voice, the acknowledgement that this was potentially goodbye. He was almost to the door when she called out, "Ethan?" He turned back. "I meant what I said about wanting to see you again, about meeting Jamie. If you're willing to give me your number, I'll call you. When things settle down, I promise." Claire was watching this exchange with undisguised interest, her sharp eyes moving between them like she was solving a puzzle. Ethan pulled out his phone, read off his number, and watched Vivian add it to her contacts with her functional hand. "I'll hold you to that promise," he said. Then he left before he could say anything else, before the moment could stretch into something more complicated than it already was. The hallway seemed too bright after the dimness of her room, the hospital sounds too loud, the normal world reasserting itself with uncomfortable force. Jamie arrived like a small hurricane, bursting into the waiting area and launching himself at Ethan with enough force to nearly knock him over. "Dad! Dad! You're okay! Aunt Beth said you helped someone in the snow and you were a hero, and the police were looking for you, and—" He pulled back, eyes wide and serious. "I was really scared." Ethan dropped to his knees, pulling his son into a proper hug, breathing in the familiar smell of kid shampoo and playground dirt and home. I know, buddy. I'm so sorry I scared you. I'm okay. Everything's okay now. Where were you? What happened? So Ethan told him, editing out the worst parts but keeping the essential truth, the accident, the cabin, keeping someone safe until help could arrive. Jamie listened with the intense focus he brought to anything that captured his imagination, asking questions that were sometimes profound and sometimes completely random. Was she nice? The lady you saved? She she's very nice. Can I meet her? Ethan glanced at his sister, who raised her eyebrows in a way that said they'd be having a longer conversation about this later. Maybe. We'll see. Did you see the helicopter? Was it cool? It was very cool. The rescue team was amazing. I want to be a helicopter pilot now, not a paleontologist. Helicopter pilots save people. They do. Though paleontologists are pretty important too. Beth caught his eye over Jamie's head, and Ethan saw the concern there. The question she wasn't asking in front of his son. He gave her a small smile that he hoped conveyed that he was okay, that this was a conversation for later, that right now he just needed to hold his kid and remember why survival had mattered so much. They left the hospital together, stepping out into afternoon sunshine that felt almost aggressively cheerful given everything that had happened. Jamie chattered the entire drive back to Beth's house, his 7-year-old brain already processing the adventure into something epic and exciting, the fear already being rewritten into story. That night, after Jamie had finally crashed from exhaustion and excitement, after Beth had fed him dinner and run him a bath and tucked him into the guest room bed, Ethan and his sister sat at her kitchen table with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. So, Beth said, in the tone that meant she was about to ask questions he might not want to answer. This woman you saved, what's her name? Vivian Cross? Beth's eyes widened. As in Cross Industries' Vivian Cross? The tech billionaire? Apparently. Ethan, you spent 2 nights alone in a cabin with one of the richest women in the Pacific Northwest? I spent 2 nights keeping another human being alive. Her bank account wasn't really relevant to the situation. But you like her. It wasn't a question. Ethan thought about lying, about brushing it off as gratitude and proximity, and the weird intimacy of survival. But this was Beth, who'd held him when he cried after Sarah's funeral, who'd taken Jamie for countless weekends so he could work extra jobs, who knew him better than almost anyone. Yeah, I like her, which is completely insane because we live in different worlds, and this will never work, and I'm probably just projecting because of the intensity of the situation. Or, Beth said gently, you're a widower who's been alone for 5 years and finally met someone who makes you feel something other than grief and responsibility. That's allowed, you know. You're allowed to feel things for someone. She's a billionaire CEO, Beth. I'm a carpenter with a mortgage and a 7-year-old. What kind of future could we possibly have? I don't know. But maybe you owe it to yourself to find out. You've spent 5 years putting everyone else first. Jamie, your clients, even Sarah's memory. When do you get to put yourself first for once? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. He went to bed in Beth's guest room. Jamie sprawled across the other bed in that boneless way kids sleep and stared at the ceiling for hours. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent. Vivian had his number now. The question was whether she'd use it, whether their promises in the hospital would survive contact with her real life, whether the connection they'd forged in the cabin could exist anywhere else. 3 days passed. Jamie went back to school, armed with a story about his dad, the hero that made him temporarily famous among the second-grade set. Ethan returned to work, fielding questions from curious colleagues about the rescue they'd all heard about on the news. He fell back into the rhythms of his normal life: breakfast and school drop-off, work and school pickup, homework and dinner, and bedtime stories. His phone didn't ring. On the 4th day, a package arrived at his house, delivered by a courier service that definitely didn't work for minimum wage. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery and a check that made Ethan's hands shake when he saw the amount. The note read, "Ethan, I know you'll try to refuse this, but please don't. Consider it not payment for saving my life. That's beyond price. But rather a practical acknowledgement that you lost work time and probably have expenses from the rescue. Jonathan's funeral is Saturday at 2 p.m. at Riverside Chapel in Seattle. I would be honored if you'd attend, though I understand if you'd prefer not to. I haven't forgotten my promise. I'm just trying to figure out how to keep it without disrupting your life or using my resources in ways that would make you uncomfortable. Thank you for giving me something to think about other than work. It's been a revelation. Vivian. The check was for $50,000. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, staring at the number, trying to process what it represented. This was more than he made in a year of construction work. This was Jamie's college fund paid off in full. This was security and breathing room and the ability to say no to jobs he hated. This was also deeply uncomfortable, a reminder of the vast gap between their lives, a transaction that tried to put a price on something that had felt priceless. He should return it. Every instinct told him to return it. But he thought about Beth's words. When do you get to put yourself first? And about Jamie's future, and about the fact that Vivian was right. He had lost work time, and his truck needed new tires, and the water heater was making concerning noises. He deposited the check. Then he called his sister. I need you to watch Jamie on Saturday. I'm going to Seattle. The funeral? The funeral. Good, Beth said firmly. It's about time you took a chance on something other than safety. Saturday arrived cold and clear, the kind of winter day that made the Pacific Northwest look like a postcard. Ethan borrowed a suit from a friend, made sure Jamie was settled with Beth, and made the drive to Seattle feeling like he was heading toward something significant but couldn't quite name what. Riverside Chapel was exactly what he'd expected. Elegant, expensive, filled with people in designer suits and dresses that probably cost more than his truck. He felt immediately out of place, a carpenter in a borrowed suit surrounded by corporate executives and tech industry elite. He almost turned around and left. Then he saw Vivian. She was standing near the front of the chapel, wearing a simple black dress and the brace that still immobilized her shoulder. She looked thinner than he remembered, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical, grief written into every line of her body. She was talking to an older woman who had to be Jonathan's wife, their heads bent together in conversation that looked painful and necessary. Ethan waited, unwilling to intrude, watching as Vivian navigated the crowd with practiced grace, despite the obvious cost to her composure. Several times he saw her mask slip, saw raw emotion flicker across her face before she controlled it. She was performing, he realized, playing the role of the strong CEO who had everything under control, when what she really needed was to break down and grieve. The service was beautiful and heartbreaking, full of stories about Jonathan's life, his dedication to his family, his quiet competence and kindness. Vivian spoke briefly, her voice steady but thick with emotion, talking about his professionalism and his humanity, about the gap between what employees meant on paper and what they meant in reality. She didn't mention her own decisions or guilt, but Ethan heard it underneath every word, the weight she was carrying visible to anyone who knew to look. Afterward, as people filtered out of the chapel toward the reception, Vivian finally spotted him. Her face transformed, relief and something that looked like joy breaking through the grief, and she made her way toward him through the crowd. You came, she said when she reached him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You invited me, and I wanted to pay my respects, he paused. How are you holding up? I'm not, but I'm very good at pretending. She glanced around at the crowd, then back at him. Can we get out of here, just for a few minutes? I need to breathe. They slipped out a side door into a small garden behind the chapel, winter bare but peaceful, away from the murmur of mourners and corporate condolences. Vivian wrapped her good arm around herself, the January cold biting despite her coat, and Ethan instinctively moved closer without quite touching her. Thank you for the check, he said. You didn't have to do that. I know, but I wanted to. Did you cash it? I did, after arguing with myself for about an hour. He studied her face, seeing the exhaustion etched there. Have you slept at all since the hospital? Not really. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in the SUV, or I'm watching Jonathan try to control the vehicle, or I'm reliving the moment I told him to drive despite the storm warnings. She turned to face him fully. The company wants me to take time off, medical leave. My board actually voted on it. Can you believe that? Like I'm broken and need to be fixed before I'm allowed back. Maybe they're right. Her eyes flashed. You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side. Which is why I'm telling you that you look like you haven't slept in a week. You're still recovering from serious injuries, and you just lost someone who worked for you for years. Taking time to heal isn't weakness, Vivian. It's wisdom. She looked away, jaw tight. I don't know how to do nothing. My entire identity is built around work, around productivity, around always moving forward. If I stop, if I just sit with this grief and guilt, I'm afraid I'll drown in it. Then don't do nothing. Do something different. Something that matters to you beyond quarterly earnings and board meetings. He paused, taking a risk. You said you wanted to meet Jamie. The offer still stands. Vivian's expression softened, vulnerability breaking through the defensive walls. I'd like that. When? Tomorrow? I could drive back up here, or you could come down to Maple Falls. It's about an hour south. Not much to see except trees and small town life, but Jamie would be thrilled to meet the lady from the helicopter story. He knows about the rescue? Kid version. Heavy on the adventure, light on the almost dying of hypothermia parts. He thinks you're basically a superhero who survived a mountain crash. I'm not sure I can live up to that expectation. You don't have to. You just have to show up and answer his 1,000 questions about helicopters and mountains and whether you were scared. He's 7. Authenticity matters more than performance. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, and Ethan could almost see her working through the implications, the ways this invitation could complicate both their lives. Finally, she said, I'll come to you tomorrow. If you give me your address, I'll drive down in the morning. You sure you should be driving? Your shoulder is healing fine. The doctors cleared me for normal activities as long as I'm careful. Besides, I need to prove to myself that I can get in a vehicle again without having a panic attack. Her smile was brittle. Exposure therapy, right? If you're sure. But Vivian, if you need to cancel, if it's too much, I'll understand. No pressure. I won't cancel. I need this. Need something normal and real and not about corporate responsibility or public image. She reached out with her good hand and touched his arm. You're the only person who saw me at my absolute worst and treated me like I was still human. I need more of that in my life. They stood in the garden a while longer, the sounds of the reception drifting through the chapel walls, neither quite ready to return to the performative grief of funeral rituals. A light snow began to fall, delicate flakes that caught in Vivian's dark hair like tiny crystals. I should get back, she said finally. Jonathan's wife asked if I'd say a few words at the family gathering. Private, just close friends and relatives. It's going to destroy me, but I owe her that much. You owe yourself some kindness, too. Remember that. I'm working on it. She squeezed his arm once, then let go. Tomorrow. 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock. I'll have coffee ready and a very excited 7-year-old who's probably going to interrogate you like you're a visiting dignitary. I run a billion-dollar company. I think I can handle a second grader. Famous last words. They went back inside together, and Ethan stayed for another hour, paying his respects to people he'd never met, listening to stories about a man he'd never known, all while watching Vivian move through the crowd with practiced grace that couldn't quite hide her pain. When he finally left, she caught his eye across the room and mouthed, tomorrow. A promise, and a lifeline all at once. The drive back to Maple Falls gave him too much time to think, to question what he was doing, to wonder if inviting a billionaire CEO into his modest life was setting himself up for heartbreak, or humiliation, or both. By the time he picked up Jamie from Beth's house, he'd talked himself into and out of canceling at least a dozen times. So, Beth said as Jamie ran to get his backpack, how was the funeral? Sad. Heavy. Exactly what you'd expect. And Vivian? She's coming tomorrow, to meet Jamie. Beth's eyebrows shot up. That was fast. Is it? I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing here, Beth. She lives in a completely different world. What am I thinking bringing her into mine? You're thinking that you like her and she likes you and life is too short to let fear make all your decisions. Sound familiar? Pretty sure you said something similar to me when I was scared to go back to school after the divorce. That's different. It's really not. She pulled him into a quick hug. Stop overthinking, let tomorrow happen, and see where it goes. You deserve this, Ethan. You deserve to feel something good. Jamie was abnormally excited that evening, bouncing off the walls with anticipation about meeting the helicopter lady. Ethan tried to manage his expectations, explaining that Vivian was just a person who'd been in an accident, not a superhero, but Jamie's imagination had already run away with the story. "Does she have a scar? From the crash?" Jamie asked at dinner. "Probably, but it's not polite to ask about people's scars." "Why not?" "Because sometimes scars come from painful experiences people don't want to talk about." Jamie considered this with the seriousness he brought to all new social rules. "Okay, I won't ask about scars, but can I ask about the helicopter?" "You can ask about the helicopter." "And the snow?" "And the snow." "And if she was scared?" "That one's trickier. You can ask, but if she doesn't want to answer, you have to respect that. Deal?" "Deal." That night, after Jamie was finally asleep, Ethan found himself cleaning his house with an intensity that bordered on manic. He scrubbed counters that were already clean, organized bookshelves that didn't need organizing, picked up toys that would be scattered again within 5 minutes of Jamie waking up. Nervous energy, he recognized, the physical manifestation of anxiety about tomorrow. His house was small but comfortable, a 3-bedroom ranch he'd bought with Sarah when they were young and optimistic about their future. It had good bones, as he liked to say, and he'd spent years slowly improving it, refinishing the hardwood floors, updating the kitchen cabinets, building custom bookshelves in the living room. It was a craftsman's house, made beautiful through attention to detail rather than expensive materials. But tomorrow Vivian Cross, who probably lived in a penthouse worth more than this entire neighborhood, would walk through his front door, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she'd see the gap between their worlds written in every modest fixture and second-hand piece of furniture. He was being ridiculous, he knew. Vivian had survived 2 nights in an abandoned cabin, sleeping on a dirt floor. She wasn't going to judge his house, but anxiety wasn't logical, and grief had taught him that fear often wore disguises, sometimes showing up as cleaning frenzies at midnight. Sunday morning arrived bright and cold, the kind of winter day that made everything look sharp and clear and slightly unreal. Jamie was up at 6, too excited to sleep, pestering Ethan with questions while they made pancakes for breakfast. "What kind of car does she drive? Is it fancy? Does it have buttons, or is it one of those touch-screen ones?" "I don't know, buddy. We'll find out when she gets here." "Do you think she'll like me?" The question stopped Ethan mid-flip, the vulnerability in his son's voice hitting him right in the chest. He set down the spatula and crouched to Jamie's eye level. "She's going to love you. How could she not? You're smart and funny and kind, and you ask excellent questions. Anyone would be lucky to meet you." "You have to say that. You're my dad." "I have to say it because it's true. Those are different things." Jamie seemed satisfied with this answer, though Ethan could see him working through his own nervous energy, the same anxiety that had kept Ethan up half the night now manifesting in a 7-year-old's fidgeting and repeated questions. At 9:45, Ethan found himself standing at the front window like a teenager waiting for prom, watching for an unfamiliar car. Jamie had changed his shirt 3 times and was currently wearing his favorite dinosaur t-shirt that was slightly too small and had a stain on the collar that wouldn't come out, no matter how many times Ethan washed it. "Should I change again?" Jamie asked, appearing at Ethan's elbow. "You look perfect. She's going to love the dinosaur shirt." "You don't know that. I know that anyone who doesn't appreciate a good T-Rex is someone whose opinion doesn't matter." At precisely 10 o'clock, a car pulled into the driveway. Not the SUV Ethan had expected, not some luxury vehicle that cost more than his annual salary, but a modest sedan, the kind someone might rent when they didn't want to attract attention. Vivian emerged wearing jeans and a sweater, her arms still in a brace, but otherwise looking more relaxed than he'd seen her since the hospital. Jamie pressed his face against the window. "She's here, Dad, she's here." "I can see that. Remember what we talked about. Be polite, don't ask about scars, and if she seems tired or uncomfortable, we give her space. Got it?" "Got it!" Ethan opened the door before Vivian could knock, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the strangeness of this situation hitting them both simultaneously. Here, in the mundane light of a Sunday morning, away from helicopters and hospitals and funeral chapels, they were just 2 people trying to figure out what the connection forged in crisis might mean in normal life. "Hi," Vivian said, and her smile was genuine if slightly uncertain. "Hi, come in. Welcome to Chaos Central." She stepped inside and Ethan watched her take in the house. The worn but clean furniture, the photographs covering the mantel, the evidence of child and single father everywhere from the shoes by the door to the Star Wars poster in the hallway. If she was judging, he couldn't see it in her expression. "You must be Jamie," she said, turning her attention to where Jamie was half hiding behind Ethan's leg, suddenly shy despite all his earlier enthusiasm. "I'm Jamie," he confirmed. "You're the helicopter lady." "I am, though I prefer Vivian, if that's okay with you." "Did it hurt, the crash?" "Jamie," Ethan warned gently. "No, it's fine." Vivian crouched down to Jamie's eye level, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her still-healing injuries. "It did hurt, quite a bit. But your dad helped me, and the doctors fixed me up, and now I'm getting better every day." "Dad says you were really brave." "Your dad is the one who was brave. I was mostly just scared and cold and grateful he found me." Jamie seemed to accept this, his natural curiosity overcoming his shyness. "Do you want to see my room? I have a dinosaur collection." Vivian glanced at Ethan, who shrugged with a smile that said, "I warned you." She turned back to Jamie. "I would love to see your dinosaur collection." Jamie grabbed her good hand and pulled her down the hallway, talking a mile a minute about the difference between herbivores and carnivores, about his favorite dinosaurs and why velociraptors were better than T-Rexes even though T-Rexes were bigger. Ethan followed, watching Vivian navigate his son's enthusiasm with genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. His room was exactly what you'd expect from a 7-year-old obsessed with paleontology. Plastic dinosaurs covering every surface, posters of prehistoric creatures on the walls, books about fossils stacked haphazardly on the nightstand. Jamie launched into a detailed explanation of each dinosaur's characteristics, and Vivian listened with the same focus Ethan imagined she brought to board meetings. "This is Archaeopteryx," Jamie said, holding up a small plastic figure. "It's not technically a dinosaur. It's a transitional species between dinosaurs and birds. Most people don't know that." "I didn't know that," Vivian admitted. "You clearly know a lot more about this than I do." Jamie beamed, and Ethan felt something in his chest loosen. This was going to be okay. They spent the next hour in easy conversation, moving from Jamie's room to the kitchen where Ethan made coffee and set out cookies he'd baked the night before. Jamie peppered Vivian with questions about the helicopter rescue, about what it felt like to fly, about whether she'd been scared. She answered each question honestly, but age-appropriately, treating him like a person whose curiosity deserved respect. "Can I show you something?" Jamie asked eventually, disappearing into his room before either adult could respond. He returned carrying a shoebox, which he set carefully on the table. "These are pictures of my mom. Dad keeps most of them on the wall, but these are special ones I keep in my room." Ethan tensed, uncertain where this was going, but Vivian handled it with the same grace she'd shown everything else. "I'd be honored to see them." Jamie pulled out photographs one by one. Sarah at the beach, Sarah holding newborn Jamie, Sarah and Ethan on their wedding day. He narrated each picture with the matter-of-fact tone children use when discussing things they don't fully understand but have learned to accept. "She died when I was little. I don't remember her much, but Dad tells me stories. He says she would have liked my dinosaur collection." "I bet she would have loved it," Vivian said quietly. "These are beautiful pictures. Thank you for sharing them with me." "Dad says it's important to remember people even when they're gone, so they don't disappear completely." Vivian's eyes met Ethan's over Jamie's head, and he saw understanding there, recognition of grief as something more than abstract concept. "Your dad is very wise." After lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches that Jamie insisted on helping make, Jamie asked if Vivian wanted to see the fort in the backyard. It was a structure Ethan had built the previous summer, a simple platform with walls and a roof, but Jamie treated it like a castle. "I'll stay down here," Ethan said. "Give you two some space." "Nonsense," Vivian replied. "I want to see this legendary fort I've been hearing about." The backyard was small but well-maintained, the fort tucked into one corner under a large oak tree. Jamie scrambled up the ladder with practiced ease, chattering the entire time about the improvements he wanted to make, the additions Ethan had promised to help with in the spring. Vivian climbed more carefully, mindful of her shoulder, and Ethan spotted her from below, ready to catch her if she slipped. Once they were all inside the small space, Jamie proudly showed off the features. The window he could close with a piece of plywood, the secret compartment where he kept special rocks, the rope ladder on the backside for emergency escapes. "This is pretty impressive," Vivian said, running her good hand along the smooth joints where Ethan had connected the boards. "Your dad built this himself?" "He builds lots of stuff. He's really good at it. He says when I'm older, he'll teach me how to use the tools." "I bet he will." She turned to Ethan. "You built this?" "Guilty. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Should last him until he's too cool for forts." "I'm never going to be too cool for forts," Jamie declared. "Forts are awesome." They stayed in the fort for a while, Jamie showing Vivian his collection of pine cones and interesting rocks, explaining the elaborate games he played up here. Eventually, the cold drove them back inside, and Jamie, worn out from excitement and social performance, settled on the couch with a book. Ethan and Vivian retreated to the kitchen where he refreshed their coffee and they could talk without little ears overhearing. "He's wonderful," Vivian said quietly. "Truly. You've done an amazing job raising him. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together, but he makes it easy. He's naturally kind, naturally curious. That's all Sarah. I'm just trying not to screw up what she started. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit." She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, and Ethan noticed they were trembling slightly. "Being here, seeing this, your home, your son, your life, it's making me question everything about mine. That wasn't my intention. I know, but it's happening anyway." She set down the mug and looked at him directly. "In the cabin, you asked what I was building that was worth $2 billion. I gave you the corporate answer: technology, infrastructure, innovation. But the real answer is, I don't know anymore. I built an empire, but I don't know what it's actually for, what it means, whether it matters." "Vivian, let me finish, please." She took a breath. "You built that fort for Jamie because you love him. You built this house into a home because it matters to you. Everything you create has purpose and heart and meaning. My company has shareholders and quarterly targets and market dominalization strategies. I can't remember the last time I built something because I loved it rather than because it would increase our valuation." Ethan moved closer, not quite touching, but near enough that his presence offered support. "So change it. You're the CEO. You have the power to redirect the company toward things that matter to you. It's not that simple. The board will fight you, will push back, will tell you it's not profitable or sustainable or aligned with their vision, and you'll have to decide whether you work for them or they work for you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You make it sound like I can just walk into the boardroom and declare we're changing everything." "Can't you?" The question hung in the air between them, challenging and sincere. Vivian stared at him like he'd suggested she could fly by flapping her arms hard enough. "I've spent 15 years building credibility, proving myself, establishing authority. If I suddenly start talking about purpose over profit, about meaning over market share, they'll think the crash damaged more than my shoulder. Or they'll think you survived something that clarified your priorities. That's not weakness, Vivian. That's growth. You don't understand what it's like in my world, the pressure, the expectations, the constant scrutiny." "You're right. I don't understand that world, but I understand what it's like to have your life shattered and have to rebuild it into something new. And I know that rebuilding based on what other people expect never works. It has to be based on what you actually want, what actually matters to you." Vivian was crying now, tears sliding silently down her face. "I don't know what I want. I've been so focused on what I should want, success, growth, dominance, that I forgot to ask what would actually make me happy." Ethan did touch her then, his hand gentle on her arm. "Then maybe start there. Not with board meetings or strategic plans, just with the simple question of what would make you happy." "That's terrifying." "Most worthwhile things are." They stood in his kitchen, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, Jamie's voice drifting from the living room as he talked to himself while reading, and Ethan felt the moment's significance like a physical weight. They were standing at a crossroads, both of them, where the choices they made in the next few weeks or months would determine whether the connection forged in that cabin could survive in the complicated reality of their actual lives. "I should go," Vivian said finally, wiping her eyes. "I've imposed on you long enough." "You haven't imposed." But if you need to leave, I understand. She nodded but didn't move toward the door. Instead, she said, "Can I ask you something? And will you promise to answer honestly?" "Of course." "Do you think this," she gestured between them, "could actually work? Or are we both just caught up in the intensity of what happened in that cabin, projecting meaning onto something that was just survival?" Ethan took his time answering, wanting to get it right. "I think what happened in the cabin was real. The connection, the vulnerability, the way we saw each other without all the usual defenses, that was genuine. But you're right that it existed in a bubble, outside normal life. Whether it can survive your world and mine, whether we can find common ground when we're not fighting to stay alive, I don't know, but I'd like to find out. If you would." "I would, but I don't know how. Our lives are so different." "Then we figure it out, one decision at a time, remember? You don't have to solve everything today." She smiled through her tears. "You're very patient with me. You survived a car crash and 2 nights in freezing temperatures. I think you're entitled to need some time to process everything." They said goodbye at the door, Jamie giving Vivian an enthusiastic hug that she returned with her good arm. As she drove away, Jamie turned to Ethan with a very serious expression. "I like her, Dad. She's nice. And she listened to all my dinosaur facts without getting bored." "I like her too, buddy. Are you going to marry her?" The question was so sudden, so innocent and direct in the way only children could be, that Ethan actually laughed. "I don't think we're quite there yet. We're just getting to know each other. But you could marry her, if you wanted. I wouldn't mind." Ethan pulled his son into a hug, overwhelmed by the generosity of that statement, by the evidence that Jamie was healing too, becoming someone who could imagine their family expanding rather than remaining frozen in grief. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." That night, after Jamie was asleep, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. It was Vivian. "Thank you for today, for letting me into your world, for not making it weird or complicated. Jamie is extraordinary, and seeing how you've built a life that centers love and purpose rather than achievement and acquisition was exactly what I needed. I'm not sure what comes next, but I wanted you to know that today mattered, more than I can adequately express. V." Ethan stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Today mattered to me too. Take the time you need to figure things out. I'm not going anywhere. E." Her response came quickly. "That might be the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me." "Then you've definitely been spending time with the wrong people." "Clearly, I'm working on that." They texted back and forth for another hour, the conversation flowing easily, covering everything from Jamie's dinosaur obsession to Vivian's upcoming board meeting to whether pineapple belonged on pizza. It was normal and comfortable and felt like the beginning of something real rather than the echo of something that had already ended. When Ethan finally put down his phone and went to bed, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years: hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope that came from wanting to change the past, but the quiet, steady hope that came from believing the future might hold something good, something worth the risk of opening his heart again. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm, something neither Ethan nor Vivian had anticipated but both found themselves needing. They texted daily, sometimes about nothing important: the weather, something funny Jamie had said, a frustration at work, and sometimes about everything that mattered. Vivian was slowly returning to her company, not with the 80-hour weeks and relentless drive that had defined her before, but with a deliberation that seemed to unsettle her board as much as it clarified her own thinking. She called on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after her visit to Maple Falls, and Ethan could hear the exhaustion in her voice even through the phone. "I did something today that terrified me," she said without preamble. Ethan was helping Jamie with math homework at the kitchen table, but he stood and moved to the living room, giving himself privacy. "What happened?" "I told the board I wanted to redirect 30% of our resources toward projects that prioritize social impact over immediate profitability. Infrastructure for underserved communities, educational technology for rural schools, environmental monitoring systems for cities that can't afford enterprise solutions." She laughed, but it sounded shaky. "You should have seen their faces. Like I'd suggested we light money on fire." "How did they respond?" Michael, he's the chairman, accused me of having a psychological break from the trauma. Said I was making emotional decisions that would destroy shareholder value. 3 other board members agreed with him. Only 2 supported me, and I think one of them was just being polite. Ethan could hear the pain underneath her words, the vulnerability of putting herself out there and being rejected. What did you say? I told them that I'd spent 15 years building this company according to their definition of success, and it had left me empty. That I'd survived something that most people don't survive, and it had clarified what actually matters. That if they wanted to remove me as CEO for prioritizing purpose alongside profit, they could call a vote. But I wasn't backing down. Vivian, that's incredible. That took real courage. It took rage, mostly. Rage that they thought they could tell me what my own company should stand for. Rage that they were more concerned about quarterly earnings than Jonathan's kids growing up without a father. Her voice broke slightly. Rage that I'd let them shape me into someone who would have agreed with them a month ago. So what happens now? They tabled the discussion pending a comprehensive strategic review, which is corporate speak for giving me enough time to either come to my senses or give them ammunition to replace me. But Ethan, I don't care. For the first time in my professional life, I genuinely don't care if they fire me. I'd rather lose the company doing something meaningful than keep it by selling out everything I learned in that cabin. Pride swelled in Ethan's chest, fierce and protective. I'm proud of you. That must have been terrifying. It was, is. I keep waiting for the panic to hit, for the fear of losing everything I've built to overwhelm me. But mostly I just feel relieved, like I finally stopped pretending to be someone I'm not. They talked for another hour, Vivian processing the day's events while Ethan listened and occasionally offered perspective. When they finally hung up, he found Jamie standing in the doorway, pajama-clad and curious. Was that Vivian? Yeah, buddy, she had a hard day at work. Is she okay? She will be. She did something really brave today. Jamie nodded seriously, processing this. I like her, Dad. I hope she comes back to visit soon. Me too. But 2 days later, she did. It wasn't planned. She simply showed up Friday evening, looking exhausted and raw and more real than Ethan had ever seen her in professional context. She was wearing jeans and an old sweater, her arms still in a brace, but less restrictive than before. And when Jamie opened the door and launched himself at her with a delighted shout, she caught him with her good arm and held on like he was a life raft. I needed to see you both, she said over Jamie's head, her eyes meeting Ethan's. Is that okay? I should have called first, but I just got in the car and started driving, and suddenly I was here. It's more than okay, Ethan assured her. We were just about to order pizza. You're welcome to stay. She did stay, through pizza and a movie that Jamie insisted she had to watch. Through his bedtime routine where he asked her to help read his dinosaur encyclopedia. She handled it all with genuine engagement, asking questions and listening to answers. And Ethan watched his son fall a little bit in love with her, watched the easy way they interacted, and felt something in his chest that was equal parts hope and terror. After Jamie was finally asleep, they sat on Ethan's back porch with coffee and blankets. The February night cold but clear, stars visible in a way they never were in Seattle. I'm sorry for just showing up, Vivian said. That was presumptuous. Stop apologizing for wanting connection. You're allowed to need people. I'm not very good at it. Needing people, I mean. I've spent so long being self-sufficient, proving I don't require anyone's help or support, that I've forgotten how to ask for it. You're doing fine. You showed up. That's asking. She turned to look at him, and in the porch light he could see tear tracks on her face. The board is going to force me out. Michael made that clear in a private conversation today. They're building a case that I'm psychologically unfit to lead due to the trauma from the accident. They'll offer me a generous severance, keep me on as a figurehead if I want, but they're taking operational control. I'm sorry, they can't do that, can they? They can and they will. I have shares, but not enough to override a unified board vote, and they're unified on this. They think I've lost my mind, that prioritizing social impact is financial suicide, that I'm letting emotions override business sense. What are you going to do? Vivian was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the stars. I'm going to let them have it. The company, the control. The whole empire I spent 15 years building. I'm going to take the severance, sign the agreements, and walk away. Ethan's first instinct was to argue, to tell her to fight, but something in her expression stopped him. You've already decided this. I decided it while watching Jamie fall asleep tonight, watching him trust me to read to him, to be part of his bedtime routine, to matter in his life in some small way. And I realized that everything I've been fighting for, the company, the control, the validation of being right, none of it matters as much as this, as being here, as building something real instead of just profitable. Vivian, you don't have to choose between your company and... He gestured vaguely between them. This, whatever this is. I'm not choosing between the company and you. I'm choosing between who I've been and who I want to become. The company was built by someone who thought worth was measured in market share and success meant domination. I don't want to be that person anymore. The accident, the cabin, Jonathan's death, meeting you and Jamie, all of it showed me there's a different way to live. A better way. What will you do if you walk away from Cross Industries? She smiled, and it was the first time Ethan had seen genuine peace on her face. I don't know. And that terrifies me and excites me in equal measure. Maybe I'll start something new, something smaller and more focused on actual impact rather than growth for its own sake. Maybe I'll take time to figure out who I am when I'm not a CEO. Maybe I'll make mistakes and fail and have to rebuild from nothing. But at least it will be authentic. At least it will be mine. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of her decision settling over them both. Finally, Ethan said, You know you're welcome here, right? I don't mean that you have to move to Maple Falls or change your entire life, just that whatever you decide, wherever you end up, Jamie and I, we're here, if you want us to be. Vivian turned to him fully, setting down her coffee cup. Is that what you want? Because I need to know, Ethan. I need to know if this is real, or if I'm projecting meaning onto something that was just circumstantial intimacy. If I walk away from my company, if I rebuild my life, I need to know whether I'm doing it towards something or just away from what I had. It was the most direct she'd been, cutting through all the careful dancing around feelings they'd been doing for weeks. Ethan took a breath, knowing his answer would change things irrevocably. I think I started falling for you in that cabin, he said quietly. When you asked me about my promise, when you let yourself be vulnerable despite being terrified. And every conversation since then, every text and call and visit has just confirmed what I already knew. You're brilliant and complicated and wounded and brave, and you make me want to be better than I am. So yes, this is real. At least for me. I'm a mess, Vivian whispered. I'm unemployed as of next week. I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. I'm still in physical therapy for my shoulder, and I cry at random moments because I can't stop thinking about Jonathan's kids. You could find someone so much simpler, so much easier. I don't want simple. I had simple and easy with Sarah, and it was beautiful and perfect. And it ended with her under the ice while I stood there frozen. You're not simple, and you're not easy, but you're real. You're here. And you're choosing to be here even though it scares you, which is braver than anything I've ever done. She kissed him then, leaning across the space between their chairs, her good hand cupping his face. And it was nothing like the desperate sharing of warmth in the cabin. This was choice and intention and the conscious decision to be vulnerable with another person. When they broke apart, both of them were crying. I'm staying tonight, Vivian said. Not in your bed, not yet, but here, in this house, with you and Jamie. I need to know what it feels like to wake up here, to have breakfast with you both, to see if this could actually be my life. The guest room is yours for as long as you want it. She did stay, and when morning came and Jamie discovered Vivian making pancakes in the kitchen, his delighted shriek probably woke half the neighborhood. They spent Saturday together as something almost like a family. Breakfast, a walk in the woods near Ethan's house, lunch at the local diner where everyone knew Ethan and was clearly curious about the elegant woman with him. Vivian handled the small-town attention with grace, answering questions about how she knew Ethan with a simple, "He saved my life," that was both true and insufficient. That evening, after Jamie was in bed, they talked seriously about logistics and reality. Vivian's severance package was being finalized, a sum large enough that she'd never have to work again if she didn't want to. She had an apartment in Seattle she was planning to sell. Too many memories of who she'd been living in those expensive walls. She wanted something different, something smaller, though she wasn't sure yet where. Maple Falls has a rental market, Ethan offered carefully. Not fancy, but functional. If you wanted to be close while you figured things out. I don't want to impose on your life, on Jamie's routine. You two have something good here, and I don't want to disrupt it. You're not disrupting. You're adding to it. There's a difference. Over the next month, Vivian did move to Maple Falls, renting a small house on the other side of town. It wasn't a commitment to permanence, they both agreed, just an experiment to see if proximity could work, if what they'd built could survive the mundane reality of actual life together. She started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma, working through the accident and Jonathan's death and the complicated grief of losing an identity she'd worn for 15 years. She spent time with Jamie, becoming a fixture in his life in small, steady ways, attending his school play, helping with science projects, teaching him basic coding because she couldn't help being who she was even when she was trying to change. And slowly, carefully, she and Ethan built something real. They had dinner together most nights, sometimes at his house, sometimes at hers. They navigated the awkwardness of Jamie's questions about whether Vivian was Ethan's girlfriend, ultimately settling on honest answers that, yes, they cared about each other and were seeing where it might go. They had their first real fight about whether Jamie needed more structure in his after-school routine, Vivian's default to optimization clashing with Ethan's more relaxed parenting style, and they worked through it with the kind of honest communication that felt terrifying and necessary. 3 months after the accident, on a mild April evening, Vivian showed up at Ethan's house with news that she was vibrating with excitement to share. She'd been working with a small team of former Cross Industries engineers who'd followed her out the door, developing a nonprofit focused on exactly the kind of social impact work the board had rejected. They had seed funding from her severance, partnerships with 3 school districts, and a mission statement that prioritized purpose over profit in ways that would have horrified her former self. It's tiny compared to Cross Industries, she told Ethan and Jamie over dinner. We're talking a team of 6 people working out of a shared office space. But it's mine. It's meaningful, and I wake up excited to work on it instead of dreading another day of maximizing shareholder value. That's amazing, Ethan said, and meant it. I'm proud of you. I couldn't have done it without the cabin, Vivian said quietly. Without you showing me that there was a different way to measure worth. That building something with heart mattered more than building something big. Jamie, who'd been listening with the serious attention he brought to adult conversations he found interesting, spoke up. Does this mean you're staying in Maple Falls? Vivian glanced at Ethan before answering. Would you like me to stay? Yes, definitely, yes. You're good at helping with homework, and you let me explain dinosaurs without getting bored, and you make Dad smile more than he used to. Then I'm staying, Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. If that's okay with your dad. More than okay, Ethan confirmed, reaching across the table to take her hand. 6 months after the accident, on an August evening warm enough to sit outside without blankets, Vivian and Ethan found themselves back on his porch, the same space where she told him about leaving her company. But now there was a comfort between them, the ease of people who'd chosen each other repeatedly and were still choosing. I met with Jonathan's wife today, Vivian said. She invited me to lunch, wanted to update me on how she and the kids were doing. How are they? Surviving, like all of us, I guess. She's going back to work part-time, the kids are in counseling, they're making it work day by day. She said something that stuck with me, though. She said Jonathan would have been proud of what I'm doing now, that he always believed I was capable of more than quarterly earnings reports. He was right. Maybe. I'm still figuring it out. She leaned against Ethan's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her. Some days I miss the simplicity of my old life. The clear metrics for success, the straightforward goals, and then I have dinner with you and Jamie, or I see one of our prototypes working in a classroom that couldn't afford technology before, and I remember why I walked away. No regrets? So many regrets. But not about this. Not about choosing meaning over money, or you over solitude, or this life over the one I had. She paused. I've been thinking about something. A question I want to ask, but I'm terrified of the answer. Ethan's heart rate picked up. Ask. Do you think there's room in this family for me? not as a visitor or a girlfriend who lives across town, but as someone permanent, someone who stays. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Vivian, you've been part of this family since Jamie asked if you liked his dinosaur collection, and you spent an hour listening to him explain the difference between the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. The question isn't whether there's room. The question is whether you're ready to commit to the chaos and mundanity and beautiful ordinariness of life with us. I'm ready. I'm terrified, but I'm ready. Then move in with us. Not next month or next year. Now. Bring your therapist appointments and your nonprofit work and your terrible habit of organizing things that don't need organizing. Bring all of it, all of you, and let's build something together. She was crying again, but this time the tears felt like release rather than grief. Jamie might have opinions about this. Jamie has been asking me when you're going to live here for the past 2 months. I think he'll manage. They told Jamie the next morning over breakfast, watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to pure joy. He insisted on helping Vivian move her things that very weekend, treating it like the adventure it was. And when her boxes were unpacked and her clothes hung in Ethan's closet and her books integrated with his on the shelves, it felt less like an addition and more like a completion of something that had been missing. The following spring, on the anniversary of the accident, they made a trip together up the mountain. All three of them bundled against the April chill. They hiked to the old logging cabin where Ethan had kept Vivian alive through 2 desperate nights. Someone had been there since, probably hunters or other travelers caught by weather, and the cabin showed signs of use. But the fireplace still stood, and the walls still held, and the space still carried the memory of what had happened there. Jamie explored with the fearless curiosity of an 8-year-old while Vivian and Ethan stood in the center of the room, remembering. I hated this place, Vivian said quietly. When we were here, I hated every minute of it. The cold, the fear, the complete loss of control. But looking back, I think it saved me. Not just physically, but in every other way that matters. It changed both of us, Ethan agreed. Made us face things we'd been avoiding, made us choose what kind of people we wanted to be. I'm glad we faced them. I'm glad I met you, even if it took a blizzard and a car crash and 2 nights in hell to make it happen. They left an offering in the cabin before they departed. A weatherproof box containing emergency supplies, matches, energy bars, a blanket, a first aid kit. Just in case someone else needed it someday, needed a refuge in the storm. Ethan added a note. Shelter in place. Help is coming. You will survive this. Back home, they settled into the rhythms of their life together. Vivian's nonprofit grew slowly but steadily, each new partnership and successful implementation a validation of her choice to prioritize impact over empire. Ethan's carpentry business expanded as word spread about his craftsmanship, allowing him to be selective about projects, to choose work that excited him rather than just paid bills. Jamie flourished with 2 adults invested in his growth, his dinosaur obsession gradually shifting to robotics, but maintaining the same intense focus. They weren't perfect. They still fought sometimes, still navigated the complications of blending lives that had been separate for so long. Vivian struggled with her instinct to optimize and control everything, learning slowly to accept that not everything needed improvement. Ethan wrestled with his protective instincts, learning to trust that Vivian could handle challenges without him solving them for her. But they worked through it, choosing each other repeatedly, building a foundation on honesty and vulnerability, and the shared knowledge that they'd both survived their own kinds of storms. 2 years after the accident, Ethan proposed. Not with fanfare or elaborate planning, but on an ordinary Tuesday evening after dinner, Jamie already asleep upstairs, both of them tired from work, but content in each other's presence. He simply pulled out the ring he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment, and realized that this was it, the ordinary, exhausted, deeply happy moment that defined their life together. Marry me, he said, not because we have to, not because there's any rush, but because I want to choose you officially and publicly, because I want Jamie to have the stable family he deserves, and I want you to be legally and irrevocably part of it. Vivian took the ring with shaking hands, tears already streaming. Yes, absolutely yes, on one condition. Name it. We get married in the mountains, somewhere close to that cabin, because that's where this started, where we both learned what we were capable of. I want to honor that. Deal. They married in September. Small ceremony on a mountain overlook with views that stretched for miles. Jamie served as ring bearer, taking his duties with utmost seriousness. Beth stood up as Ethan's best woman, having been there for every step of his journey from grief to hope. A handful of Vivian's team from the nonprofit attended, along with some of Ethan's crew from work. It was intimate and meaningful, every detail chosen because it mattered to them rather than because tradition demanded it. Jonathan's wife came too, bringing her kids, and stood in the small gathering as a reminder of the cost of the storm that had brought Ethan and Vivian together. They honored his memory in their vows, acknowledging that their happiness was built on the foundation of his loss, that they would never forget the price others had paid for their second chances. The reception was held at a local restaurant in Maple Falls, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and celebrations were community affairs. They danced and ate and laughed, surrounded by people who'd watched this unlikely love story unfold, who'd seen Vivian transform from grief-stricken CEO to engaged community member, who'd witnessed Ethan open his heart again after years of keeping it carefully guarded. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Ethan and Vivian found themselves outside under the stars, the same stars that had shone down on them through the cabin's gaps, witness to their survival and their choice to build something from it. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, echoing their conversation from months ago. "None. This life, this family, this choice, it's everything I didn't know I needed." She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up on me in that cabin, for carrying me when I couldn't walk, for teaching me that strength isn't about being invulnerable, it's about being willing to need someone. Thank you for showing up at my door, for choosing this ordinary life over your extraordinary one, for loving Jamie like he's yours. He is mine. You both are." They stood there for a long time, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chosen to build the best possible life. The mountain loomed in the distance, dark against darker sky, holding its secrets and its storms. But they'd survived those storms, learned from them, been transformed by them. And now they had something more valuable than any empire or achievement. They had each other, and they had a future built on choice and commitment and the stubborn refusal to let fear make their decisions. Inside, through the restaurant windows, they could see Jamie showing off his new robotics project to anyone who'd listen, his face animated with enthusiasm, completely secure in the knowledge that he was loved and valued and part of something bigger than himself. He caught sight of Ethan and Vivian through the window and waved enthusiastically, beckoning them back inside. "Our son is summoning us," Vivian said with a smile. "Our son," Ethan repeated, loving the sound of it. "Let's go." They walked back inside together, leaving the stars and the mountain behind, choosing the warmth and light and love of the life they'd built. The blizzard had passed long ago, but what it had revealed, the strength they possessed, the connection they'd forged, the capacity they had for rebuilding from ruins, that remained. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.